Good morning again. I hope you enjoyed the coffee break and the first part of the symposium. My name is Lina Daou. I'm a faculty member, assistant professor at the Alayan School of Business, and I'm going to be the moderator for this second part of the symposium. The second part is titled 2000s and Beyond. So we're going to be talking about the past, but the more recent past. This session is going to be audience-led, which means that it's going to be interactive. We're going to be taking comments and the questions from the audience, while listening first to our speakers and students who will be joining me here on stage. So I just need to, I'm waiting for my mic. No? Okay. Yeah, can we start? Okay. So please, I would like you to join me in welcoming Dr. Samer Frangieh from Political Science and Public Administration, Dr. Muna Fawaz from the Department of Architecture and Design, and Dr. Bana Bashour from the Department of Philosophy. So, Samer, your title here is The Slowing Time on Campus. It's a very interesting title. I'm very keen to hear more about it.
Thank you, Lina. Well, the role of the title is to be a bit intriguing, since I don't think it really points to anything but to the question of temporality in our academic work. And so before starting, I mean, I'd have to say that to speak after the first session where we heard really interesting talk about the history of this university, I mean, it's an honor, it's an intimidating one, yes. But it's also a bit of a puzzling one. These exercises often give the impression that the heydays of any institution of AUB are in the past, and that we, those who have been defined as the present and looking ahead to the future, have very few experiences to share or even to look forward. So it's quite hard to qualify the 2000 as exciting time, to have stories about teaching at gunpoint, at least not for now, but we're coming to that, or even to think of a strike, let alone the longest one. So what we have is issues, and issues do not always make for a very engaging talk. And to make things even worse, I'm not very good with issues, so I already lost a third of my time trying to explain the brief, and an additional 10 seconds explaining my explanation. And so halfway or a third into my intervention, I lost a lot of time. And maybe this is the point of my intervention, that despite the misplaced sense of urgency that surrounds us, we actually do have time, or we have to slow time, hence the intriguing title, at least in our scholarly and university work, if we don't want to be subsumed by or submerged by the surrounding logic, market logic, and other forms of speeding of time. And so what I'm trying to highlight in this 2 to 3 minutes is not simply a romanticization of slowness against the valorization of speed in our age, but to point to one of the defining transformation in the landscape of university, which has been dubbed differently, the managerial turn, the rise of the administration at the expense of the faculty, or the corporatization of the university, and which might be, and I'm saying might because it's not yet the case, but we're going there, might be one of the greatest threats facing our craft as educator and researcher. And one of the entry points of this logic into the working of universities has been through the problematization of academic time and its constant attempt to calculate, discipline, and organize the time of academic. And just to give an example of this audit culture, we can think of the countless exercise we do in order to account for our time, from end-of-year report to self-studies, to the various acronyms from PLOs, CLOs, ICEs, etc., that try to always make sure that we're using time in the most productive manner. And that also translates into a change of our subjectivity as professors. So we're gradually being turned into busy manager, and our students are turned into impatient customers, and try to teach them the value of slow reading in that environment. And the university are turning into administrative machine. And I think that my two colleagues will address different aspects of that transformation. So if I had 2 minutes to highlight one issue of interest, or rather of concern to junior faculty as they look ahead to the future, it might be paradoxically the possibility that we might catch up actually with the latest trend in the management and organization of university. We often complain about the fact that we're peripheral, we're away from where the cutting research edge is being, research is being done, or away from where the center of research is, but this lateness, this distance, can sometimes be a blessing in disguise, and it can give us the time to experiment with different approach, to think differently about our comparative advantage, and to go back to what Mohammed Matar has said, to think of us as a time-space capsule in which we have some leeway from the demand around us. In a way, we are going, I mean, if I have to close on a more positive note, we are going, or we are taking step in that direction. So for instance, reinstating tenure at a moment where tenure is under attack, or having scholarship for humanities at a moment where the humanities are constantly being defunded, is a step in the right direction, or at least we see it as a step in the right direction. And so maybe at a time when the university is in crisis in the world, AUB has an opportunity to be or to become this space-time capture, kind of a laboratory space in which we can experiment with different approaches or different temporality for scholarly work, and that in a sense require us to embrace our lateness and to take it as one of our advantage to have the time. Actually, we still have the time because we are to some extent a bit late. So turning one of our weaknesses into a potential source of strength. So the intriguing title, a bit meaningless, was about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you, Sami. So before we turn to the audience, we'd like to hear also from our other two speakers today. Muna, there's a topic that we have discussed and debated a lot in the past few years. It's a very relevant topic, you know, staying relevant in the era of impact factors. So please, if you can share with us your point of view.
Sure, thanks, Lina. So my name is Muna Fawaz, and I teach in research urban planning here in Beirut. This may seem like an oxymoron. I research and teach how to make cities more livable, better adapted to the needs of their dwellers, more responsive to their aspirations. I think about affordable housing. I think about public space. I think about greenery. I think about clean air. I think about making cities more adequate to the needs of people with disabilities. I think about municipalities that are accountable and transparent, that have institutionalized participatory mechanisms where city dwellers can influence how they think their cities should be. I think about all these issues in Beirut. Teaching this material, my credibility rests less on telling my students that yes, this has been achieved elsewhere, than in inspiring them, convincing them that it's possible to use the material they have learned to make a change in the context where they live. I have to inspire them to be creative, to think about how they can make this change. I use my research on slum upgrading, inclusive planning, public space, but also the militarization of the city and the proliferation of security, or again, the destruction of the shared commons, in order to initiate debates and instigate initiatives that work towards in the direction of making things better. Let me show you a few examples. In 2006, when the Israeli airplanes destroyed the southern suburbs of Beirut, with students and colleagues, we worked to create. We organized workshops and worked to create alternative plans that would be more, that would invest in rendering the neighborhood more livable. We produced documents and maps with which we engaged with the local municipality, the political parties, and the dwellers, and we published them eventually into a document that we used to initiate those debates in the Order of Engineers, in the local newspapers, and everywhere. We wanted the neighborhood to be rebuilt better than it had been. A couple of years later, when the political class turned Beirut into a maze of security enclaves, next please, we mapped every single tank, roadblock, and security element in the city. We published this map here in Beirut. We also exhibited it everywhere else. And we used it to get people thinking about what it means for city dwellers to be living in areas of high security, how it changes their experience of being, their experience of the city. Sadly, with all this efforts, things have gone actually worse, not better. More recently, we also work to continue this conversation about public space. We published a couple of months ago an issue with the local As-Safir in which we presented all sorts of initiatives towards public space. We chose not to whine about the fact that Beirut has less than 1 square meter of public space per individual. Rather, we wanted to show that whatever we had of these public spaces, such as streets, actually functioned really well to provide the seed to get people to think about how things indeed can be better on the basis of what we have. I don't have time to explain to you what all these documents are. I just want to say that I strongly believe that this is the work that makes our presence here relevant at AUB. But there is no H-index to measure one's relevance in one's local context. There is no way in which we can measure how our voices are actually coming into students' brains, changing, making ripples to make actually the context where we live, perhaps a couple of decades later, better. To test whether we are indeed relevant in the world in which we live. Academic planning journals provide me with a wonderful space to think about my experiences, often my failures, to learn about experiments that have been done elsewhere, to actually engage scholars in other contexts, but also to rethink critically the frameworks that I use and to be able to come back to Beirut with a different approach. But they are not enough, clearly not sufficient to measure my relevance. As a professor, I find myself caught in the complicated struggle of balancing between the necessity to speak and participate in conferences and publish, conversing with colleagues across the Atlantic, and being relevant in the context where I am. It is a difficult struggle, and what makes it really difficult is the fact that my university has not yet begun to value this role. In this happy anniversary of, in this happy event occasion of the 150th anniversary of AUB and the inauguration of a new president, let us take a minute to remember that AUB's value to the world does not only rest on its contributions to the scientific community. It is also important that we remain relevant to the world in which we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. She spoke about, on behalf of many of us here, and we'll get back to you later with some questions. But now, Bana, so you're going to talk to us about culture wars, intellectual and corporate culture wars. Is that on campus at AUB or in academia in general?
I would say in academia in general.
Okay.
But hi, my name is Bana Bashur, and like most of you here, AUB has a very special place in my heart. In fact, actually, quite literally wouldn't exist without AUB. You see, my mother, Palestinian, Jordanian scholar, came to AUB and wouldn't have crossed paths otherwise with my father, who is a Lebanese Syrian political activist. Chances are they wouldn't have crossed paths had it not been for this haven of free thought in the 1960s. Now, my father often teases me about the glory days of AUB and how it must have really gone down to hire me as a professor of philosophy. Some of our older faculty members make similar remarks, but without the humor, right? And to my generation of younger scholars, that sounds kind of like an insult. You know, your predecessors were intellectually much richer than you. But to be honest, they were. But I don't think it's because they were systematically smarter or more hardworking than any of us. I think it's because of this big shift in the culture of the university from the intellectual to the corporate. Now, this is the celebration of AUB's 150th anniversary, and that's something really worth reflecting on. Now, why is this happening? Well, I think this is a global phenomenon. This is not special to AUB. And unfortunately, we tend to adopt a lot of what other prestigious universities do with that, unreflectively and without engaging with the scathing attacks that surround them. So I'll give you a bunch of examples. This big explosion of administrative layers, the constant spike in student tuition fees, allowing only the rich to access education, and the resultant consumer culture within the students. Now, of these last, I have a ton of examples from my time as a freshman advisor. And freshmen are great because they're very transparent, they're not self-conscious, they say whatever comes to mind. And for me, that really reflects a lot about the student culture. And so when they're selecting their majors, they think of it in the following way, as though it's a technical school where they come, they learn a specific skill, they go, they land a job, and that's what higher education is about. And if you think of higher education the same way, then our problem is much bigger than we thought. Now, Samer spoke about the commodification of time. That's another example. Muna about this sort of rising focus on impact factors. Both of those are examples of how this quantifying outcomes in both research and teaching is really helping with the downfall of the culture of this institution. Now, I'll make one remark about teaching, and which is a way the university has chosen to cut cost, by prioritizing budgetary and governance concerns over educational ones. And this is by, having bigger classrooms that hold hundreds of students. Now, in this day and age, this is the information age, and we all know that education isn't about just passing on information. Really, all of us can go online and download courses about really anything from some of the most prestigious universities. So having a lecture where the professor comes in with hundreds of students and just disseminates information, that doesn't achieve the goal of educating. We're supposed to be, engaging the students critically, culturally, morally, to really give them a chance to become genuine, good citizens of the world. Now, I'll end with some anecdotal points. When I was an undergraduate in the 1990s, sort of the halfway mark between the 60s, my parents' days, and today, my friends and I used to loiter around the Green Oval and just hang around there and have really heated but very childish conversations about existentialism, the existence of God, and all of these philosophical issues. And we'd look over at the benches and see our professors sitting there and doing the more mature version of that, each of them talking about the latest book they'd read or the latest article they were writing. Now, I'm happy to say that when I'm running from one meeting to another right now, I look at the Oval and I see our students are still engaged in the same activities. But unfortunately, when I look at the benches that were formerly occupied by the professors, they're empty. And when professors by chance meet each other in the hallway, those busy professors end up talking about this or that administrative issue. I really hope that one day we can be back on those benches, talking about the latest in philosophy, mathematics, physics, psychology, and really all disciplines. Excellence starts with a rich intellectual community, and we have the ingredients, so let's make one. Thank you.
Thank you, Bana. Three very interesting ideas and talks. I would like to turn to our audience for any comments or questions, if anyone would like to share with us or with the speakers, or even to our speakers if you have anything to comment or share. I learned this trick. I use it a lot with my students. I keep on standing with a big smile and staring until someone feels the awkwardness and raises their hand. So I hope it will work with you now. Yeah. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Randa Tommy. I was just interested with the professor of urban development because I've been here only a few days, and I was wondering on my own, actually even yesterday, if there is any in this city with all these tall buildings, very tiny little streets. Is there on a national level, is there a department or a ministry of some sort? Is somebody thinking about it?
Well, you are right. Beirut's planning unit is dysfunctional. The city does not have the very normal position that any city would have, which is like a chief city planner. We do have planning agencies that are obviously not as successful as they should be, but at the local level especially, this position of the chief city planner and her team is not there.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hello, I'm Charles Laubach. In the spirit of rhetorical questions, I have a question for you, Bana. This careerism among students isn't new, is it? I mean, weren't they the same way back in the 70s and 60s and 50s? What's the point of college if I can't get a job afterwards? Weren't kids always like that? Don't their parents encourage it? Don't their secondary schools encourage it? I don't think it's a new phenomenon here in Beirut in the year 2016.
No, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. You're right. I don't know what it was like in the 60s and the 70s because I wasn't born. But it is still dangerous, right? Even if it's something that's been eternal, right? I don't necessarily think that, I mean, of course I don't think that students should come here and not ever get a job afterwards or not plan on getting a job afterwards. But you see, careers and jobs, the real jobs that are out there are actually much more than we think they are, right? There are so many job descriptions that our students, and even we don't have no idea what they are, right? What we're supposed to do with the higher education, with this understanding, this kind of critical engagement that we give them, is we're supposed to give them these tools to be moral, good, critical thinkers. And that should enable them to do well afterwards, regardless of the specific track that they selected. You see, one of the big problems is that they think that their careers are linear, right? I do a degree in engineering, I end up working in engineering, I spent my life as an engineering. That's not really the reality of things. There's a very interesting book on the chaos theory of careers, actually. And this idea that people have, where they know ahead of time what they're going to end up doing, like while in college or before college, it's just a very mistaken idea. Like statistically, it's very mistaken. And so I would urge or encourage parents, faculty members, or students themselves to think of this as just a one stop along their careers, not the shaping of the rest of their careers. And that was the idea. But yeah, I don't think it's a new thing, absolutely.
Any other comments or questions? Yes? Can I add? Yes, please go ahead.
Just to add a bit to what Bana has said, is obviously there is a trend, at least, or there is a constant phenomenon in at least in Lebanon, advising to it for student isn't always, doesn't allow them always to explore. I mean, we tend to think of engineering, medicine, business, and probably that's it. And if you're doing a BA in history or philosophy or even political science, parents and school tend to think that this is a dead end. And obviously this has always been the case, but I think there is a slight difference now. I mean, when we think about tuitions and the increase in tuition, it becomes much harder to think of doing a BA in history when you might incur debt that can barely be repaid with a BA in history, even though I think that you have the same chances of getting a job later on, but this is not the impression. And so I think there is a slight difference between the 60s and 70s and now, and that has to do not only with AUB, but also with the transformation of the labor market and the transformation of the way through which we fund our school years or our university. So I think there is a constant factor here, or there is a structural factor, but there is also a transformation that we need to look at. And obviously, Lebanon isn't the worst case scenario. I mean, we are hinting at a possible transformation rather than describing a reality. But to be able to have that in mind allow us at least to think of possible way to deal with it later on. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. We have a question here. Oh, sorry. Yes, we'll take a question there and then we'll come back to you.
I'm Rosemary Bustani. I'm at the medical center, and I don't think the outlook is this bleak. You must have noticed students over the last 3 years at AUB are engaged in a lot of NGOs and activities. My cousin's daughter went and taught English in some remote area of Madagascar. This was not existent, and I think the difference between the movement now and the movement then is that there's no violence associated with it, so you're not aware of it. But there is a very healthy social awakening amongst the youth at AUB.
Good morning all. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the wonderful stimulating presentations. My name is Ghalib Dao. I'm sort of become living all over the place, but it's so refreshing to hear this discussion. I wanted to first comment on your comment about the tuition and the price of education. And what is the price of ignorance? Because that's priceless, really. It puts it in context. But really, the value of that money has not changed. I remember my father, way back in the late 60s, early 70s, we were having a discussion whether we should pay for my other brothers, full tuition in Shweifat High School, which is a private school, or buy Volkswagen, because that was the same price. So if you think of it these ways, it's still about the price of a car per year. It doesn't change much. But anyway, my question was, again, to build on Dr. Bustani's comment, the value of, the outlook is not really that bleak. In fact, I think you are far more empowered to do much more than what these old professors used to sit on these benches and discuss old books, among other their marital problems or whatever else they were talking about. And I think you have the tools to do that, because those days, as one of the previous speakers this morning said, there were no cell phones, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was nothing like that. And I think these are very powerful tools. And the media that you have nowadays, it has a global reach. In fact, whenever I go to AUB pages or any other university pages and I hear the discussions, I learn quite a few things every single day. So where do you see the value of social media, of the new technologies and moving onward in reshaping the intellectual endowment of AUB students in the next 150, or maybe, we cannot say next 150 because we don't know about the next 50 or 5. Where do you see that being able to be used?
Go ahead, Samir. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it is not as big, of course. I mean, part of the looking ahead toward the future is in a way to identify some of the possible threat, danger. I'm usually a bleak person, and I would kind of say it is a bit bleak, having nothing to do with AUB, but we are in a bleak time in the Arab world, especially in Lebanon, and obviously it's quite paradoxical that we're saying it's not that bleak, and we just had the presentation about the civil war and hospital at gunpoint. Obviously we're not there, and this is not the comparison we're making, but we are a generation that came to age after the war, and so in a way we're building on what we know. And what we know, for me at least, part of what AUB represented as a student, because I was a student at AUB, I'm going to say something very cheesy here, but cheesy sometimes it's true, has nothing to do with the courses I took. It has a lot to do with what AUB represented in the 1990s for me, which was the first time I actually came across a vast literature, knowledge of cinema, meeting professors, and most of them were not my professor. Actually, none of them were my professor, the interesting one, and that has to do with my advising, and I didn't know how to choose my courses. But what I remember from this year were really that intellectual environment. I'm not so sure that I am providing that to my student now because of the change that we're mentioning. Part of it has to do with the fact that students are not as dependent as they were on the physical space of AUB due to the presence of social media. And I noticed that in my teaching, that there are certain things you don't need to give students anymore. They have access to all of these information that usually were our responsibilities. And I mean, when you ask a question in the class, in a 2 seconds, you have a Wikipedia answering coming from somewhere. And I think that this is a very good development, and we should encourage that. I have no problem. But that should also force us to rethink, what do we add to that environment of information and speed? And for me, what I remember from AUB is that this was 3 years in which I could have time to do certain things which I probably won't do later on in my life. Partly this is why I encourage students to take classes in the humanities, because even if they're not going to work in that field, this is probably the only opportunity they will have in their time to engage with these issues. So again, social media is very important, but there is, let me say it this way, there is some irrelevance to the university that needs to be kept. There is a certain distance that has something productive to give. And for students, this might be the only time they have this. So social media is great, but we're not simply social media. Part of us is also a bit old-fashioned. And that takes me to the benches of Bana, which I think is a very important development. I mean,
and one thing about this great information age is that there's an explosion of knowledge, right? There's all sorts of different sites and different discussions of various things. And that one of the big problems is for students or for people in general to be able to discern the good quality from the not so good quality. And another problem with this explosion is that people tend to always, and this is, there's psychology experiments that sort of show that people tend to frequent the website that already agree with them, right? They tend to look at the things that don't challenge them. And I think that is one of the problems. I think it's really important. It's really crucial for it to be used and to be engaged, but carefully and with a lot of guidance.
Thank you again, Bana, Samir, and Muna for joining us and for the very, very interesting talks and questions. We can take one more question. Yeah. Okay, so this is the last question we take, and if you have any more,
it's not a question. It's just a comment to Ms. Fawaz. My name is Karam Doumit, and in my scope of work, I deal a lot with the Urban Development Office in Beirut. And I think that they do have quite good engineers and developers and planners and everything. But the problem is with the politicians here, that they don't let them work. And they try to bend things and twist them in such a way to make good things into bad ones. So that's the real problem that we have. But as of quality, I do think we do have good quality engineers there. Thank you.
Thank you again. Please join me in thanking our speakers again. I know many of you will have more questions and comments to share with them. They're going to be joining us for lunch later when we meet downstairs, so please feel free to go and ask them and engage further. But for now, I would like to invite our next three speakers, Dr. Naila Aqil from the Department of Landscape Design and Ecosystem Management, my colleague from the Business School, Dr. Haytham Khouri, and Dr. Evelyn Hitti from the Faculty of Medicine, who's also the chair of the Emergency Medicine Department. So Naila, you're going to be starting with us, and you're going to be talking about campus and the landscape on campus. And I think this is one of the most beautiful things and most valuable things we have at AUB, our campus.
Exactly, and I'm hoping everybody really knows that. And just in case they don't, here are a few more images to remind you a bit of that. So I actually asked a student of mine once to tell me about her favorite spot in AUB. And this is what she showed me. I had not seen this space in AUB, and I don't know if a lot of you have, but I think, unless you're adventurous enough to go beyond the traced path, hidden treasures like these are often forgotten and go unseen. Next, please. These are the landscapes we know of AUB. There are the beautiful trees that surround our also beautiful buildings, and there are the gardens that create memory spaces for us. And really, these are the manicured landscapes and landscapes that are meant to be great most of the time. And these are the landscapes that we pass by every day, and they become part of our daily journey. But, there are also different types of landscapes in AUB, and this is one of them. These are the wilder landscapes, and these are the ones that are really allowed to grow. And they are just as important, as significant, and even more for us and for the ecosystem of AUB and for the sustainability of the campus. And I think we really need to realize that. So I think a lot of us have seen these beautiful images of AUB, aerial photographs. Just recently there was a book, 23 Most Beautiful Universities in the World, and AUB was part of that. And while most universities had photographs of their buildings, AUB actually had photographs of its landscape. And I think this is extremely important. And it's the role of AUB to really preserve that landscape. And I don't mean really preserving a certain tree or a certain garden and really making static what's alive and what's changing. But by preserving, I mean giving the landscape the opportunity to really fill out the role it was made to be. Next. So these are all images that were taken by a student of mine, Mariam Yahya, and they show you what landscape is really about. It's about space, so it's about the dialogue between open space and the buildings. Next. It's about scale, so if you look at these very famous spaces in AUB and look at the landscape around them, they allow the human being to really feel as if their scale and part of nature. Next. They're about views, and I think all of us know the beautiful views we have here on AUB. And also it's about topography, and that's very important. And if we look specifically at that image, you'll start realizing the layers of history of that campus through the topography that it shows you. You have the natural layer, you have the man-made layer, and if you start thinking a bit more, you'll start to understand the stories that came about and that started creating that space. And so in a way, to preserve AUB and to preserve the AUB landscape, we really need to look at all of this pressure that's being put upon us to build new facilities and have new buildings and these spaces that are very important. But start thinking about those in terms of extending outwards. Start thinking of preserving the landscape by starting to look at AUB beyond the formal boundaries of its gates. Let's look at the community AUB has created as well. Let's look at the spaces that surround what we call the gates of AUB and the fences of AUB, and really live by them. Let's for a moment forget our beautiful gates. You've seen an image of main gate. This is medical gate, which really starts a bit to blur that sense of boundary. AUB MC's campus is a bit more spread out than the AUB campus. And I think in some way, we complain about the identity, but in another way, it also is serving a much bigger purpose. It's becoming part of the community in a much better way. And by that, it's starting to become much better at being preserved. So there are many efforts that are being made to extend out, but also I think to bring people in, and that's as important. We have our open lectures, we have our exhibitions. We heard earlier about the outdoors event. All of these try to invite the community into AUB, and I think that's extremely important. We have the green field that does that on the weekends. We even have one space that's also as important and even more important, which is the playground. And it's amazing what you see there over the weekends and where people come from to actually come to this playground. And soon you'll hear about a very important initiative called AUB Botanic, and I think really keep an eye open for that one as well. But one space that really is important, and I think is really important to look at, is AUB Beach. And I think the reason for that is we never know, is AUB Beach part of AUB? Is it part of Rayan Nimraisi? Is it part of the Corniche? And I think this is the trick. Everybody has a certain attachment to AUB Beach. Everybody relates to it in a different way, appropriates it in a different way, and have their own stories about it. And I think this is the way to preserve a landscape. So I'm going to leave you with a few images. We might not remove walls or gates tomorrow, but I think, look at that space, and I think that's a space that has changed identities over time. Some of you might know it as Bliss Gate, others might know it as IC Gate. It's an entrance to a school, it has housing along it, it has a bookshop, just like what a community generally does have, what the city has. And I think let's look at these spaces. This is a space of infrastructure. It has long staircases, it has utilities and pipes running along it, but it's also a space of connection. It connects Bliss to the sea, it connects Bliss to the Corniche. And this is one of the most important parts of the AUB landscape. And so can we start thinking about this space as one that is both a space of AUB and a space for the community? And can we just for a moment just imagine what that space can become in the future? And in that, try to think of the landscape of AUB as being, in a way, both for AUB itself, but also for the community in order to preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Haitham is also a big lover of the AUB campus, and I remember having talks, while walking down from Bliss to the business school. It's so worth it to be working at this business school just so that we can see this view and enjoy this landscape while we're heading to work. But Haitham, today your title says that we are all the other.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more.
Well, first, happy 150th AUB. What do I want to celebrate? I want to celebrate the potential of AUB. The potential of AUB as a diverse community. I know it sounds funny to talk about potential in an institution that is already 150 years old and hopefully another 150 if not more, but hear me out. I started as a sophomore psychology major in 1995, and the country had only been a few years out of the civil war. The different parts of Beirut and Lebanon were still starting to cross those invisible lines that defined everybody who they were, what their whole background. And I was enthralled by AUB, I'll be honest, by the idea of a true liberal education, the idea of being free, to think for myself, to be whoever I wanted. And I couldn't wait to get to this campus. Honestly, I've heard it from my parents and their parents, and meet and engage new faculty, as well as students. And a lot of them have become my friends now. And then my first day at AUB happened. I remember it clearly. It was October 5th, 1995. It was a Thursday, and I looked like this. That's me with the red hair and the tie-dyes. This is us running for elections. We were the non-political group at the time, the only one. My first class was Arabic 201. It was at 8 a.m. It may be 9 a.m., but it was that first day of class. And my professor at the time took umbrage with an opinion I had given to a hypothetical situation that he had posed. He was looking to see what our reaction was. And so I gave my answer. And he quickly dismissed it and indirectly insinuated that I was disrespectful for disagreeing with him. And then proceeded to criticize me for looking one like that. Well, I had longer hair at the time, shoulder length, and I liked grunge music. But he criticized me for the way I looked, the way I did, and for speaking the way I did. According to him, and this is true, this is almost verbatim, I embodied all the reasons why our society was in trouble. So that was my first lesson at AUB. I was devastated. Luckily, he was not my last professor, and over the next 4 to 5 years, I got to know many more who encouraged me to really do think for myself, to think differently even, and to take risks. I made friends with people at AUB over my years here, and who were very like me. I mean, this is something we do. We like people who are like us. But also, we were also very different from each other, people who were unlike me. We were a post-Civil War group of friends. That was our generation. We were adamant to avoid the mistakes our parents had done. So far, not so great. We came from different backgrounds, and we bonded over our conviction that that really was our strength. We are told AUB is diversity. AUB is about being people from different backgrounds. But diversity in our world today is more than just religion or sex. It is really, diversity is about embracing all sorts. We are embracing diversity as gender, as a skin color, as age, disability, sexual orientation, and social background, and really what is important from within the AUB context, the diversity of thought. The way I see it, if our thoughts are diverse, and if we allow for that diversity to exist and flourish, what we're doing really is we're less likely to shut out the other person. So this is the other in my group. We are all others. We all have our different backgrounds. Research, our area as an organizational psychologist, we know that diversity does make us work harder. It makes us more creative. It encourages thinking of other alternatives, of many alternatives, if you will, even before we actually interact with others. So simply being exposed to different people, or the anticipation that you are going to be meeting, talking, dealing with someone who is different, forces us to be better, to anticipate alternative viewpoints, and to realize that a fair and equitable consensus will take effort to achieve. It's not easy, but the differences are more important. It also, importantly, exposes the unfairness in systems and the discrimination that exists that we don't see or probably can't see because of our own personal backgrounds. We need diversity if we are to change and to grow. On this last point is where I'm most positive and most hopeful. I've spent 12 years so far at AUB, 5 of those as a student and the rest as faculty. And I've been fortunate to meet many colleagues, students, and staff who think the same way, who believe that our strength as a community of AUB will also influence our society, hopefully, and that is diversity. That is our strength. And as Bana, my colleague and misfit from 1995 and onwards, said earlier, we have the ingredients we need to change and grow, so let's get cooking. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Haytham. And before we turn to questions and comments from the audience, Evelyn, we've witnessed lots of changes, positive changes at AUB MC in the past few years, and it's only getting better. And you want to talk to us about AUB MC as a platform for impact. So please, from your experience.
So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about my experience coming into AUB. Unlike a lot of the speakers here, I actually did not do my education or any part of my education here. I did undergrad through med school and then an MBA all at Hopkins. And then I worked actually in a private community hospital for 4 years before coming back to academics. So certainly the decision to come to Beirut to begin with and to AUB in particular was one that came with a lot of anxiety. about returning to academia, and then about coming to a place where my specialty as an emergency medicine physician is a very young one. Even in the US, emergency medicine is 40 years old, and at AUB in 2007, Dr. Qazi started and established the Department of Emergency Medicine. So when I came in 2009, it was only a couple years old. But I came nevertheless, and after my first shift in the emergency department, I thought it was going well. And my last encounter with a patient who I felt I had a very good rapport with, as I was leaving the room, she asked me, "Doctora, شو اختصاصك? What's your specialty?" And I said, "Emergency medicine." So she looked at me and smiled and said, "عقبال ما تتخرجي ويصير عندك عيادة لحالك." So I knew that there was a long way for the specialty to go. Then the other big challenge was the language. So having spent the majority of my formative years in the US, coming back and speaking Arabic, especially medical Arabic, was a bit of a challenge. So after 2 years of working in the emergency department at AUB, a nurse pulls me aside one day and he says, "Dr. Hitte, it may be better to tell patients that you're going to be doing فحوصات عليهم, not دراسات." So essentially I was telling them I was going to be doing research on them for the past 2 years, and no one bothered to tell me. So, but I really think, in all seriousness, I think the biggest challenge coming from especially a private, very well-oiled hospital to academics was in the introduction to the world of academic committees. So in my interest in operations, I started working on a protocol that I wanted to implement, and I had to channel it and champion it through one committee after another, after another, after another. After 2 years, when we were getting ready to implement the protocol, a new study had come out no longer recommending one of the main drugs that we had on the protocol. So, but I'm still here. And there are many good reasons why I'm still here. So at Hopkins, the Department of Emergency Medicine was established in 1974. 20 years later, the Board of Trustees recognized the specialty and the department. In the past 6 years, we started off with 2 emergency medicine trained faculty. We are now 6. We revamped, with the help of a very visionary dean and very supportive hospital director and chief of staff, we've revamped our operations, and we're up to 53,000 patients. We're the busiest ED in the country. We started an emergency medicine training program in 2012 that just got accredited by ACGMEI. And can we go to the picture, 2 pictures before? One more before this one. So this summer, we graduated our first homegrown emergency medicine physician, and there are 20 more in the pipeline. Every year we take 5, and I am confident that these are people who are going to go and staff emergency departments across the country and really change the landscape of acute care in our communities. So, of course, on a final note, we can go to the final picture. This is our current residents. There are actually 5 more now this year. But on a final note, yesterday while I was working in the emergency department and thinking about 150th and what it meant to be at AUB, a patient walks up to me and says, "Who's the emergency physician on today?" So I think coming to that and having that achievement in just 5 years and changing that culture has been a tremendous experience. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened at AUB in a place that I think is a magnet for people with a sense of purpose. It happened with a very visionary leadership, a committed leadership, and talented faculty. So emergency medicine has come to Lebanon, and its home is AUB. That's all.
Thank you very much to our 3 speakers. I'd like to turn to the audience now and take comments or questions from the audience. I'm going to use the same old trick. It worked the first time. Let's see whether it's going to work this time. Yes, you have a question there or a comment?
Hi,
I'm Karen Sukhan from the Environment Lab, and my question is to Haitham. It seems that we have touched a tiny bit on the self-criticism. Do you think AUB at the micro and at the macro level can benefit from an auto-criticism? If yes, should it be monitored, moderated? Should it be done annually? Should it be once every 150 years?
Thank you, sir. Well, I think, can you hear me?
Let me help you. No, I can't hear you.
I think. Hello? Yeah. So I think auto-criticism is definitely an important thing. And by no means should it be, I think, put into a process where it's once a year we reflect. I think reflection is something that we should introduce in our lives on an individual level. On a day-to-day basis, we are going through experiences every day with different people, with different things. And if we don't reflect, where is the lesson learned in the end? Where is the improvement? Where would it come from? If I don't sit down and at least self-criticize. As a group, I hope it's not the next 150 years when we have this again and then go, okay, what did we do wrong now? Or where did we go from here? It should be something we all do as an exercise, as a challenge, if you will, for each one of us to do for ourselves. That self-reflection. I don't know if I covered everything you asked.
Just a comment on the environment and the importance of it in terms of career choice. I came in here because I had to do engineering because I was very good at math and physics at the IC. But hitting AUB and getting into the climate of AUB allowed me then to move on. Well, I'll do medicine. That's better because I can be a psychiatrist. That's closer to my interests. And then I discovered psychology, so I decided, well, I'll just be a psychotherapist. Then I discovered philosophy, which I thought I would never be interested in, and that took the rest of my life. All the time I was doing theater. The environment of AUB is what will help. So what I was thinking was that we need to publicize this better. We need to help students coming in be told that you don't have to be stuck in what your parents have pushed you into. Now, of course, in those days I could do that because tuition was much cheaper, so there were other reasons. But I'm thinking that I don't think we do enough in terms of what was said today in clarifying to new students and then letting it become a part of the culture. That there are so many other things you can do, and you can survive. Look, I've survived here, didn't do engineering or medicine. So that's I think is just a practical point. Unless it's already being done, and I'm not seeing it. Okay.
I think that's a. You want to answer?
I'm just going to say something we were actually just discussing right now, young faculty, about, when we were in AUB and what we were doing. And we discovered that none of us actually came in doing what we're doing today. So most of us started with one major, shifted to another major, and then today we're doing something we hadn't, we knew nothing about when we were at AUB. And I think that's very important. And I agree that I think, and I'm going back to what Bana was talking about earlier, we need to have the opportunity to tell our students, this is one way of doing this. The best way to do it is, be open to everything that's around you. And there's one lecture that I give to my students before they graduate. And in that lecture, I tell them to do as many mistakes as they can as fast as possible, because actually this is what leads you in the right direction. I mean, you try things out, you do different things, but you have to have the courage to do them and to do them fast, because I think that's the only way to grow. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but in a way, I think talking today and talking to each other, we realized that we are here today, and none of us had imagined we'd be here, 10 years ago.
My name is Abdsalam Haykal. I was a student at AUB between 96 and 2000. I'm one of many people in the room that AUB changed their lives. Listening to all the presentations today, and I think it was an inspiring morning. I feel that there are two time zones. There is a zone in which time travels fast, which is wanting to go to college, wanting to graduate, then find a job, and then move on with life. And there is a zone where time is almost idle. I had the privilege of meeting a person like Konstantin Zrek. We were waiting in line to greet John Waterbury when he became president in 1998. And I asked him, what do we do? I mean, it was looking bleak back then, 98. And I asked him, what do we do? He said, read my book, which was going to appear soon after, Mal Amal. And we live in different contexts also. I mean, the time zones are different and the contexts are different. They might seem parallel, but sometimes they go in opposite directions. And yes, we benefited the region, we benefited Lebanon, we benefited Syria, where I come from, and many people today feel that we are a production line to send graduates to seek opportunities elsewhere. So we're enabling them to become the human beings they want to become, but at the end of the day, they're not finding the opportunity to contribute to their societies. And we live in a nonsensical region. So my question is, do we do, and I mean, it's something that I wanted us to do more when we were students in 1996. The university, as you said, I mean, it was fresh out of civil war. We just restored student elections, the student government. There was activism on campus. And we protested against also tuition fees. And this is one of the areas where time zone, when the time seems idle, because it's still happening. So do we help students? How do we help them, probably more precisely, to make sense of the nonsensical events that are happening around us? How do we bridge the context? How do we bridge these time zones? It is, I think, what AUB would really make a difference in as we bring these students closer to the context in which they're going to operate later on.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment?
Well, it's a comment, not really an answer. This is an answer, I think, much bigger than the few minutes we have here on stage. But what I like to do with my students is to push them to keep engaged, to keep getting involved, to you're asking how do we change this? How do we get them to find? I said, you make your way, figure out what it is that you want, how it is you want to go get it. And then you have to try to make that space for yourself here. As a collective, make sure it's I mean, there are certain guidelines, if you will, that I have on how you treat others, how you think about other people. But otherwise, it is, you have to get engaged, you have to get involved. These aren't going to come to you. So.
I think so I'm going to speak from my experience, but I think for emergency medicine, for example, or medicine in general, the big thing that we are trying to push for is, and this has been a discussion of relevance, so whether it's relevance in terms of projects or relevance in terms of research, which is a big thing, this is I think where a lot of our energy should be going. Local journals, locally funded research. So once that allows you at least to delve into the local problems, and once you delve in, you start the connection. The other that is a lot more logistical, but AUB's affiliate, at least for our graduates, when we're thinking about where are these emergency medicine physicians going to go in a country that still doesn't value the specialty, the affiliations that we are bridging with other hospitals like the Kisrwain Medical Center and opening opportunity for them, that is something that we are actively investing in and putting a lot of effort in to keep our graduates local and keep them within Lebanon in a way that they can live comfortably as well. So we do have a role to play as AUBMC or AUB in general, and we have to think outside the box about how do we help our graduates find opportunities and keep them in Lebanon, not just going out to the region.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. We're going to take the last comment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very
time.
much for a lovely discussion and for a great day. My name is Nabil Kronfol. On a scale of AUB Aging Index, I share with Huda Zrey that we are 9/15, having met 9 present. I really would like to comment on Evelyn, on Dr. Hetty's comment, and actually it takes also Mona Fawaz's earlier comment. She mentioned about training emergency physicians and how this has is going to have a ripple effect on having physicians staffing other emergency room. And I think this is really a dimension that we ought to stress in the making history. We have focused on making history of AUB itself and what it did within AUB. I think there is a far larger dimension, which is what AUB has helped do in an implicit way. It has changed the society. It has encouraged other organizations to do the same, other universities to flourish, other departments to grow. I think the ripple effect of AUB beyond the walls of AUB is a very important dimension that we ought to stress in these celebrations. And I think President Khoury really mentioned about our being involved more in the Lebanese scene as well as in the region scene. But the involvement need not all be explicit. It can be implicit. For example, and I don't know if he's still here, Ghassan Ahmadi, when he started the family physician, it was also in the same period when, the same modality that Dr. Hatti. There were no family physicians, neither in Lebanon nor in the region. Now you have scores of family physicians that have been trained, and not only that have been trained at AUB, but they have really generated similar programs across the region. So I'd like to mention that there are two dimensions that we need to think, not only about what AUB did, but what AUB encouraged others to do based on on its own success. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Rana wants to say something.
I apologize for not being able to take another question because we're running out of time, and I just got a look from President Khoury that people are getting hungry look. So exactly, and we still have 3 speakers still yet. So I apologize. Okay. We can keep it till after, maybe perhaps during lunch we can do that.
Just wanted to say something on the behalf of the alumni, because I think we forget about the alumni, huge community out there. And I came all the way from the US for this, and we make AUB has been, my name is Rana Hajji, I'm coming from Atlanta, and AUB is making history, it's making the present, and it's making the future. And it actually, the one thing, I apologize if I didn't hear all the morning presentations because I was stuck in traffic from Tripoli. But, AUB has instilled also a sense of service, whether you're serving Lebanon, serving the region, or serving the world. This all started at AUB. For me, it changed my life, and it instilled the sense of service, and it continued for life. And I hope that we continue as a university to I didn't even know about the alumni when I was a student. So I hope we continue to strengthen that the students have actually a whole world out there who's willing to help them. We have a very strong alumni community that's very much alive, and it's really they're happy to serve. So anyway, congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for our speakers. And I'd like to welcome our last 3 speakers, Dana Abed, who's a BA Media Studies student and the current editor of Outlook. Aysam Kaisi, graduate student, Department of Political Studies and Public Administration. And Mira Haidar, undergraduate student, Department of Architecture and Design. So thank you all for joining. I think we're going to start with Dana. Yeah. So Dana, you want to talk to us about what makes an AUB student great?
Yes, that's true. Hi everyone, my name is Dana Abed. And really, what makes AUB students great is one word, the opportunities they get. During their 3 to 4 years here on campus, they get to join clubs, AUB elections, Outlook, the campus yearbook, and all those are chances for students to unleash their potential and actually see their efforts come to life on print during the event by winning awards. But Dr. Bana spoke about the transfer from cultural to the corporate, and I'm here to comment on this from a student's perspective. We do have all these chances, but let me ask you one thing. How many students are here with us? Okay, the number is very, very few. So we are at one of the most important celebrations in the history of AUB, and everyone here has been speaking about a school to which we all belong. So I wonder, where are the students? Which also pushes me to think, where do we stand as a generation? So as I was looking into older Outlook issues, I saw that a few years ago, editors used to receive letters criticizing their point of views and arguing with them. So right now, I wonder every day what happened to the politically and socially active youngster who is soon stepping into the real world and is expected to outshine everyone in the region. And at this point, I feel like we tend to be more receptive than productive as students. I believe with the stress from schoolwork augmenting and the need to find a part-time job, enroll in internships, to perfect that one skill we are learning in our majors, it's making us find no time to engage in activities that go beyond our scope of thinking. We live in a world dominated by competition, and holding a bachelor is sadly no longer enough. We have to fill that CV. This fact makes us alienated from the rest of the society, not aware what's going on in the greater community. It's true that we are the sons and daughters of civil war victims, and our parents either chose to flee the country or to stay here, and both choices were hurtful. We have been told to stay away from politics because it only brings damage, and we have been told to strive for greatness only to make it into the capitalist world dominated by Wall Street. But is our role only to excel in the business world? It is our responsibility as students to break that bubble. Yes, we have to get this 9-to-5 job, but also we have to remember to think for ourselves and critically judge what's happening around us. And to the older generation, please guide us into the activist life. Show us books, tell us stories, and give us bigger and better platforms to express ourselves. And to my fellow colleagues, do you want to start? Read Outlook. I'd like to receive letters to the editor, just like old days.
Thank you, Dana. So, Aysam, you're going to talk to us about politics on the AUB campus?
Right, campus student politics mainly. I was a bit involved in campus student politics. I am a bit now. At AUB, student politics mainly involves the dynamics between many student groups, some faculty members, and of course the administration. In order to claim legitimacy, that is to speak on behalf of students, these student groups participate in elections. They compete in elections to gain seats in the various student representative committees. Now, a large portion of these groups are simply an importation of the political forces in the country, but some are independent secular groups, groups which have been founded on this campus and developed within the walls. Now, credit goes to the students themselves for developing these groups, but I believe also to AUB for treating its students as individuals whose rights are protected, AUB citizens, if you will, in a country where citizenship seems to be absent at the moment. But why should students participate in elections if it feels, or at least felt for the last 5-6 years, like the major decisions on campus, including tuition increase, housing costs, and other services prices, do not seem to be in the students' reach? The channel of communication between the student body and the administration was not in the best of shape in the last few years. The channel of communication between the student body and the board of trustees seems only to open slightly whenever there is some kind of problem on campus, as exemplified by the protests against tuition, when AUB students basically shut down the university in the spring of 2010 and the spring of 2014. So, looking ahead, looking to the future, why shouldn't student politics at AUB be about formulating a constant and transparent channel between the student body and the board of trustees? Many universities around the world, many top universities, have a student seat on the board of trustees. Why shouldn't AUB lead in this region in this regard, establish this constant and transparent channel, and open up a seat for students on the board of trustees? Thank you.
Very interesting point. Very interesting. We hope to hear from some members of the Board of Trustees later about this point in particular. So now I would like to turn to Mira. Mira, you mentioned here that why AUB needs to change, and many of the other speakers talked about this. So please tell us from your perspective.
Okay. Thank you. I could sit here and talk about the greatness of AUB for hours, but I won't. Instead, I would like to take this opportunity to address some things that should change, in my opinion. As a fifth-year architecture student who has been in AUB for the past 5 years, I would like to approach the educational system for the benefit of the student. So first off, we are given political freedom without true political awareness. I am free to vote in the students' election for whoever I want to vote for, without necessarily understanding the consequences of my political actions. And I think AUB should offer us as students courses, especially that we are in Lebanon, that mandatory courses that talk about our history, but also about politics and the games of politics. Since college is a preparation for us to be significant individuals in the future, I think that AUB, that we should receive the unbiased, that we should receive from the unbiased university the basic knowledge that we need for to understand our political rights and duties. The second thing I want to stress on today is the list of required courses that we are requested to take as students. There are specific credits that we cannot graduate unless we finish them, which are from social science, natural science, quantitative thoughts, and humanities. And these choices highlight the imbalance in the things we learn, especially that humanities offer a wide variety of courses. Therefore, a student can spend 3 years and more in the university and never take any cultural course and never learn anything about the arts, whether historical or contemporary, or about theater or music. And this is an essential part of our college experience, to take courses outside of our comfort zone, to be more cultured. So I ask AUB to, instead of focusing only on the sciences, to give the arts an opportunity to be explored by all of its students. And it's really necessary for the students to take these different fields and learn more from these courses. And this is why AUB needs to change the curriculum to give fields such as theater, art, and music, and media the importance it deserves. It also needs to understand our situation in the country and base some of our learning journey on that. And in the process of sculpting us to be the best individuals we can be, I ask AUB to take into considerations some of the things we are saying today to remain the top university in Lebanon for the coming 150 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting talks, and I'd like to turn to the audience now for comments and questions. Yes. Please, if you can use the mic.
Sonia Maicha Atasi, I'm from the Department of English. I was very happy to learn that last year we had 3 new clubs in the humanities. We had the English Student Society, the Gender and Sexuality Club, and the Africa Club. And there might be more clubs that I'm not aware of. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the importance of these clubs in your lives, but also how they could possibly get more support from AUB, from the faculty, from the staff, from the administration. Thank you.
I think student clubs on campus play as big a role as the courses that we take, and shape the individual as much as the courses that we take. And in terms of how AUB can help us, or the administration can help us to develop these clubs, one main issue is open up space for these clubs to have a permanent club room. This is one minor detail that might change a lot. Now, of course, one of the major advantages of AUB is its great campus and that we can have meetings anywhere on campus, but this is something that was available for AUB students 4 or 5 years ago, and just opening up these rooms, which used to be here in West Hall, would change a lot and would make students feel like at least they have a center or a location they can get back to, and where they can meet at any time of the day. So space and having an always available space is something very important.
Dana, would you like to comment on this as well?
Actually, I wanted to comment on one fact. At AUB clubs, although they have a very good mission, a very good statement to make, but still students are not interested when events are not very fun, let's say. So I think what clubs should do is tend to find what interests the students first and foremost, and then start talking about English literature or gender and sexuality, because you know we live in Lebanon and the stereotypes are huge. That's what clubs need to overcome first. First thing they need to do.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Bassam Nassar. I'm one of those Raghda and Yusuf talked about in their great presentation. Raghda, I wish she had shown the cover of Campus 81, which was drawn by Christine Dabari. Great cover. You should all try to go and find it. It's on the front page is Garden of Eden with the students sitting on a desk, and the back page is bars with smoke of war. And that's how actually we lived at AUB in the late 70s and early 80s, in a Garden of Eden, sheltered from the war around us. And we became politically apathetic and channeled our energies to arts and culture, like a blind man whose sense of hearing becomes more acute. And unfortunately, I'm still apathetic. I don't believe we can change the surroundings around us, unfortunately. I'm still asking the same questions, and I encourage you, students, to ask the same questions, keep on asking questions, and hopefully as an alumnus, and I think we should encourage alumni to ask questions with the students, and maybe create some kind of cross-pollination, intellectual cross-pollination between alumni and students. Thank you.
Thank you, Bassam. Very nice. I really enjoyed hearing all of you. I'm very happy that activism is alive and well. I would like to respond to what you said and to the comment made by the gentleman in front of me on how can we be more relevant. I'd like to offer just a suggestion to up the liberal art content of all the technical schools. I'm a student of architecture. I studied 5 years. I had 2 electives. And when I took CS, I think it was CS 204, I was told right away that it would not count. So I audited the course. And I think Dr. Shbaya mentioned the fact that the CS is going through a transformation, but I think if you ask all the alumni and take a vote, you would see that there's a twinkle in their eyes when they mention any of the CS courses that they've gone through. So if we're going to change that, thank you. So if we're going to change, and I'm all for change, not going back, I think we should we remember that we are essentially a liberal arts college. And if you want to equip people in the graduating from here, technical or non-technical, to be better prepared in a region that's actually going haywire, the best thing you can do is provide a little bit of a grounding on the arts and the liberal thoughts, that then they will make the right choices. Okay, thank you.
You have a, over there, please.
Hello, I'm Kamal Maqdisi. I'm a professor of mathematics. It's funny, what you just said echoes something that I was about to say and amplify on. So one of the things we do face, at least when I informally advise students, I see that students have very rigid programs, or they may have to take a large number of prescribed electives, but after that point, there's almost no scope for experimentation. There's no room to try to take some courses, make mistakes in them, move on from there, have some time to reflect on what they're doing. At this point, I wonder whether, in fact, we shouldn't add a 4th year to arts and sciences, the students altogether, so that they can take a wider spectrum and really spend some time thinking about the choices they make, what courses they want. Also, advising often suffers from the fact that students never realize that all our requirements are minimum requirements, not maximum requirements. If you're supposed to take 4 courses in the humanities, that's minimum 4. You want to take 6 or 8, you're more than welcome to do so. Similarly, for the people who are a bit complaining about science, there's nothing wrong with science. That's also wonderful. If your requirements as a humanities major to take 2 science courses, that's minimum.